This is how to run the operating system Apple macOS on QEMU. This is the QEMU virtual machine. The host operating system is Ubuntu 25.04. It behaves as expected. You can install software, you can change settings, you can install updates. Let's see how we got here. Let's shut down the computer. I am following the tutorial github.com/holia/osx-kvm. On Google, I searched for macOS QEMU, the second result. I have everything configured and installed. Let's see how we actually start the operating system. We start it by running this command line in the directory where we git cloned this Git repository. It's just a shell script that only contains a QEMU command line. Let's actually look at that file. So it's QEMU system x86-64 plus a ton of command line parameters. So says enable KVM to have the best hardware acceleration possible. Allocates just 4 GB of RAM. It's configurable. 1 CPU socket, 2 CPU cores, 4 CPU threads. So that means hyper-threading. CPU from the generation of Penryn. The motherboard Q35. If you have used Word Manager before, all of these sounds familiar. A USB keyboard, a USB tablet for mouse, and this work that needs to be done for Apple computers. And then you have the firmware for UEFI. You have the macOS base system, which is downloaded from the macOS website, and then the virtual hard disk, in this case 250 gigabytes. Network interface card, Intel 1000, and the SSH port inside the virtual machine 22 is redirected to localhost port TCP 2222. So everything has started, and we're at the login screen. You can just stop QEMU if you want, but you should stop the macOS operating system from inside the macOS operating system. Let's look at the boot sequence. It shows a boot screen where you can select where to boot from. By default is the correct option, which in my case is the virtual hard disk. The default label for the virtual hard disk when you create partitions is untitled, so I kept that. And it's going to boot automatically after 20 seconds into the correct default boot option. But you can make everything boot a bit faster by pressing the Enter key. So text output from the boot sequence. The hard disk partitions are being mounted. The kernel boots, and then it switches to graphical user interface mode. Splash screen, progress bar, and then we're at the login screen, where you can select the user password, and if you want to shut down or restart. Okay, now let's run the procedure that's specified in this in the README of this GitHub repository and create this virtual machine from scratch. On the right half of the screen, we have the documentation. On the left half, we have the work, which is a terminal console. Let's follow this tutorial. Requirements says Ubuntu 24.05. I'm on Ubuntu 25.04, so this is okay. I'm on Intel 64-bit. QEMU is version 9. I have AMD SVM, so hardware support for virtualization, both in the CPU motherboard and also in the UEFI BIOS screen. You can see SVM in here. I have AMD Ryzen. I have installed all of these packages. I am git cloning the GitHub repository. Copy, Ctrl-Shift-V to paste, enter. It clones the repository and then it gets the other repository, which is OC binary data, a sub-repository. Okay, then you decide either you do one of these steps and then reboot the computer and then the setting will be enabled forever. Or whenever you want to run the macOS virtual machine, you always run this command line. This makes the changes permanent. This you need to run each time you want to start the QEMU virtual machine with macOS. Make sure that your user is member of these three user groups, KVM, libvirt, input. Then you should reboot. Like this. I don't need to reboot because I have already added my user to these groups. And I can prove that. Okay, so my user is member of the user groups libvirt, KVM, and input. Next up, this is a text user interface wizard, which is a file from this Git repository. We have changed directory into the directory where we git clone the Git repository at this step. I did not manage to make this macOS Sonoma 14 boot, neither Ventura, neither Monterey. The only thing that boots on my computer is Big Sur. By booting, it means that this text user interface wizard will download boot media from the macOS website, and then it will boot the virtual machine into that boot media. So similar to booting from a USB stick or a CD-ROM drive. But all of these do not boot on my computer. All sorts of kernel panics and from the macOS operating system. Other errors. Okay, so let's go with what we know works, which is Big Sur, option 4. So it downloads this file, base system.dmg, which is half a gigabyte in size. And then, so this is a recovery image. We're going to boot from it as if it were part of the computer. Again, if we look at the file that we use in order to boot macOS, the one that contains a very long command line for QEMU system x86-64. In there we will see that we have both storage for the UEFI firmware and for UEFI variables and for this base system and the virtual hard disk. Okay. Next up, we should convert this file base system.dmg to img format. And then we need the fourth thing, the fourth storage that's part of the virtual machine, which is the QEMU QCOW2 file, the virtual hard disk. So we're going to create a file, 256 gigabytes in size, named Mac HDD ng img. At this point, we're ready to start. But before we start, I'm going to do another tweak, another change to this file, opencoreboot.sh, because I had good experiences with this option. So in post-installation networking notes, it says that this network adapter parameter is actually the network interface type hardware, network interface card hardware. So let's look there. Not this file, the one without CD at the end. There's three very similar files. One is how to boot on Linux, the other one is how to boot on the macOS operating system. So if your host operating system is macOS, you still can run macOS in a virtual machine. Where is the file? This one. Okay, so in here, it says that for network interface card, for now it uses the network interface card type VirtIO, and there's another network interface card type, which is Intel 1000, but a very special version, 82545EM, which almost always works correctly. So let's copy this line. And replace VirtIO net PCI with this string E1000 minus 82545EM. Okay, so netdev user, net 0, and then this OpenSSH TCP port forwarding towards the host operating system. And we specify a MAC address, hardware address for the network interface card. And that's it. Probably also this type of device, VirtIO net PCI, is supported by macOS Big Sur out of the box. We save. So it would be enough if you don't comment this line and you just replace this string VirtIO minus net minus PCI with this string, and then save the open core minus boot.sh file. Okay, back to the procedure. Next up, we want to run this file that we have just edited. Open core minus boot.sh from the current directory. The first time that the QEMU virtual machine boots, if you boot into EFI, nothing happens. You just see a black screen, and after 3 minutes it will just reboot the computer. So in here you actually want to press the right arrow key and select the second boot option, which is macOS base system. This is actually the recovery file that we have just downloaded, this one, base system.dmg. Press enter to boot. Hopefully it boots correctly on your CPU and motherboard. It does on mine. Okay, so this is the way macOS boots. First, it's you can see the bootloader kernel booting the first lines in there. Then it switches the font type, but it's still text progress. Then you can see 1000 more lines, and then it switches to a graphical splash screen, to this one, where the progress doesn't really reflect the reality. Now we have booted into that boot environment, and in here the option that we want is to install the operating system. We cannot install yet the operating system because we need to format the virtual hard disk first. Let's read about it. So once booted, you should use the application disk utility, this one, within the macOS installer to partition and format the virtual hard disk attached to the macOS virtual machine. We should use the APFS file system. Okay, so disk utility, either double click on it or click on disk utility and then click continue. This is a graphical user interface application. Shows us the 3 hardware devices that we have. The first one is the base system, the DMG file that we have just downloaded, which is 2 GB in size. From this main toolbar view, we can choose show all devices. Then there's a 400 megabyte disk, which is probably for one of the 2 other disks attached to the virtual machine, storages attached to the virtual machine. Let's look again at the storages that we have. So we have OVMF code, which is the UEFI. Then we have storage for UEFI variables, OVMF vars. Then we have the base system IMG, which is the recovery base system image for macOS. And then the fourth thing that we have attached is the virtual hard disk. There's also this thing, Open Core QCOW2 for the boot. So let's format the correct storage, which is 250 GB in size, this guy. Either from the toolbar, erase button, or from the main menu. We want to erase. So edit, erase, and then just keep the defaults in here. Untitled, APFS, GPT, GUID partition map. Erase. It's creating the needed partitions and APFS containers, etc. Your file system is journaled. macOS extended journaled. Case insensitive HFS plus. APFS. So it has formatted the virtual hard disk with a partition table. It has created partitions. The other things which are specific to APFS, and it has also mounted all of the needed partitions. So this is the APFS container disk 22, and inside there's an APFS volume named untitled. That's it. We have the virtual hard disk formatted correctly. Now we can exit the disk utility tool, disk utility main menu, quit disk utility, and now we can start installing from we need to start the application reinstall macOS Big Sur from the recovery application. Double click on it, continue. It will ask to accept the EULA, and we agree, and then agree again. We select the correct storage, 250 gigabytes, untitled, continue. And we're at the progress, one of the progress windows, where it says about 2 hours remaining. We want way more details than what's shown here to see if the progress has stuck or what's actually happening. So for that, from the main menu of this application, install macOS Big Sur, we go Window and then Installer Log. From the combo box in the main toolbar of Installer Log window, we select Show All Logs. In here we can see that it says started downloading a huge package, a PKG file named Install Assistant from the software CDN, Content Delivery Network. And this file is both large, 12.5 gigabytes, and the download speed is really limited. So we expect this to take, downloading this file to take at least half an hour. We want to see when this has actually finished or when it fails to download. And for that, I have installed on my host operating system the text user interface application iptref. So that's sudo apt search iptref. And the name of the package is iptref-ng. apt install iptref-ng. It's already installed. And now we can run it. It's either iptref or iptref-ng. Probably a symlink between these two files. You need to be the user root before starting iptref, so either sudo iptref or become root and then start iptref. Detailed interface statistics. We're downloading via the Ethernet network interface card. And we're looking at the cell from the row TCP because it's being downloaded using the HTTP, not HTTPS protocol. So that means the TCP protocol. And we are looking at incoming bytes. So we can see a quarter of gigabyte already being downloaded. So what we're looking here is we should allow the installation to continue and to finish downloading this large file. We can see when it's downloading and when it's not by looking at this cell. And we don't really need to babysit the installer because if all goes well and if the installer is successful, after the installer downloads this PKG file, it will add it, it will install it, it will be added to the boot menu, and it will reboot automatically. So if you don't do anything, the macOS installer will reboot 4 times as much as needed and will install everything and get you to the installer screen where it actually asks details about the current installation, like the time zone and the name of the macOS user that needs to be created. So plan to wait at least half an hour for this huge file to be downloaded. We'll be back. At a point, the download finishes. So there was a ton of incoming bytes, and now this thing has stabilized. For the TCP, it's just 10 gigabytes. So that means that the installer has finished being downloaded, and now it has rebooted twice. Okay, so this is the installer 25 minutes later. Now it asks for the country or region. Typing works. Written and spoken language. Accessibility not now. Data and privacy. Migration assistant. Not now. Sign in with your Apple ID. Set up later. Are you sure you want to skip signing in? Skip. EULA. Agree. Full name. This will be the name of your home folder. Continue. Allow maps and other apps and services like Find My. Let's switch the time zone to New York. Continue. Where analytics. Enable Ask Siri disabled. It has chosen dark by default. And we're logged in for the very first time as the user administrator inside the macOS desktop. Introduction. Press the key immediately to the right of the Shift key. Z. Press the key immediately to the left of the Shift key on the right. Slash. ANSI United States. Done. I'm not sure if We should install updates. We certainly should shut down the virtual machine right now and do a backup before anything shut down. Okay, so in my home directory, I should create a directory OS X QEMU backup. And in here I should have open core boot sh and the largest file in here. This guy. Mac hard disk ng image 28 gigabytes. It's actually a QCOW file. Can grow up to 250 gigabytes, but no larger. Okay, let's see the next step. After you finish installing correctly, there's next steps that you can do to tweak the installation. I'm not sure if these advice, all of these suggestions are still applicable. Default command. Skip the GUI login screen. Disable the search finder. Heavily speed up virtual instances. Enable performance mode for server applications. Heavy login screen wallpaper. Reduce graphical user interface environment effects. Multiple sessions. Disable updates. Yeah, all of what's suggested until here, even disabling updates, makes sense. Disable screen locking. Yeah, it's a virtual machine, so disabling screen locking does make sense. This also makes sense. AnyDesk. What is that? Enable remote access. So ARD was part of the VNC server, VNC-like server that's built into macOS. Yeah, I didn't test these settings, but most of them make sense. So it starts by making a backup of the settings. Then you do changes in the settings graphical user interface application, and then you look at the settings again. So write the settings to a plain text file, which you can then compare using diff or another difference viewer application. Okay, now the only thing that remains to be seen is if we need a different script to start the QEMU virtual machine, as it was the case previously. So previously there were two scripts. One was called Open Core Boot, which was creating the command line for QEMU and it also contained this thing, the installation media drive, which allowed you to install the operating system. But once you had the operating system installed, then the virtual hard disk was enough. You don't actually need the base system.img any longer. So at least this command line was commented out in a second .sh file. This file I don't really find it any longer. So I guess you could comment out this part, drive install media if none, file and then format raw. But you also need to do the dependencies, which is probably this part. Install media, install media. Open Core Boot is the firmware. Install media is the file that we download from the Apple servers in order to install. So similar to a CD image, USB image, and then the virtual hard disk. But from what I see, we can keep this .sh file as it is, because it will never boot from the install media again. Now if we start the script again, open core-boot.sh, it should just boot and not try to install. So the default selection is untitled, to boot from the partition that we have created. And it will automatically boot from what I see. There's a timeout of 10 seconds or something, and then it will automatically boot. Indeed, there is a timeout, after which it boots automatically. So if you don't select anything inside the boot order screen, it will always boot correctly during the installer of the operating system and even after you have installed correctly the operating system. If you just don't select anything in the boot screen, it will select the correct option there. So this is it. This is how to install macOS operating system Big Sur on QEMU virtual machine with hardware acceleration on Ubuntu 25.04 using KVM. Everything is fast. Next up, you can see the various things that I have tried until I have got to a stable installation of macOS in QEMU. Hello, this is how to install the macOS operating system on QEMU. My host operating system is Ubuntu 25.04. On Google, I searched for macOS QEMU. Second link was github.com/holia/osx-kvm. And we're going to follow this tutorial. Let's look at the requirements. So I have at least Ubuntu 24.04. I'm on Kubuntu 25.04. The version of QEMU. No QEMU yet, so let's install it. I have Virtual Machine Manager already installed, so that means that QEMU is indeed installed on my computer. We're probably looking for this thing. So 9.2, which is greater than 8.2.2. I have hardware acceleration for virtual machines. I'm on AMD, so I have SVM enabled. We can see it in here, SVM. So that requires both a recent enough CPU, motherboard, and then enabled in the BIOS in the UEFI firmware text user interface configuration. You need to have enabled the virtualization hardware support. Modern AMD Ryzen processors work just fine, and I have a Ryzen processor CPU. So it says that I should install some software. It installs a large number of packages, more than 70. So it installs QEMU software, Word Manager was already installed, Git version control, the downloader command line application wget, 7-zip, image conversion tools, DMG to IMG, GNU make, tesseract, the screen, the text reader, so image to text, the text user interface, text editor, Vim. This step was successful. So we'll have the documentation on the right half of the screen and the terminal on the left half of the screen. Next up, we need to download a Git repository without history and change into the working directory of the Git repository. There's some modules. OC binary data. Repository updates can be pulled. No need. It's just a fresh Git clone. No need to do Git updates. Let's see what this thing does. Says that KVM, which is the Linux kernel module, might need the ignore MSRS tweak. And let's do it, but maybe not permanent. So you make it permanent by editing /etc/modprobe.d/kvm.conf. And just for the current boot, by editing the file /c/module/kvm/parameters/ignore_msrs. Okay, so if you don't enable it such that when you restart the computer, it will be enabled automatically, before starting or restarting the macOS virtual machine, you will always need to run this command line. Sudo mod probe kvm echo1 sudo t, and then this long file path. The user should be member of libvirt and kvm, which I guess it already is. Not kvm and not libvirt. Not even input. That's interesting. I'm not sure if that's the case, if I need access to all of these. Let's do it anyhow. The changes don't apply immediately, so we need to log out and log in. So log out of the graphical user interface session or just reboot the computer. I have restarted the computer and now my user, which is named N, is in the following groups, including libvirt, input, and kvm. Next up, because I did not set these change for ignore MSRS each time my computer reboots, I'll need to run the command again to write to /sys file system. Next up, we'll fetch the macOS installer, and I don't know what to select in this wizard. Let's go with the defaults. So says Sonoma, macOS Sonoma 14 recommended, so that's 7. Next step, we need to convert the file that we have just downloaded, which is in the current directory base system.img. Then it says that we need a qcow2 file. In the current directory, named mac_hdd_ng.img, 256 gigabytes in size. It's on NVMe, and we should boot. Okay. The same script works for all recent macOS versions. CLI method primary, just run the file. Use the disk utility tool within macOS installer to partition and format the virtual disk attached to macOS. Use APFS file system. I don't know what to do, but I'm going to press enter. Says Ctrl-Alt-G, key combination to exit grab from QEMU. On macOS versions greater than or equal to Big Sur, and we're at version Sonoma, we should let the installer sit at the country selection and other places if the progress is slow. The initial macOS setup wizard will eventually succeed. We'll see if that's the case. At some points in time, I did manage to follow this tutorial and have macOS installed. Other times when I tried, something totally did not work. So it's maybe some months of the year you can install, some other times you cannot. After a while, the computer just rebooted. So it was blank for a while back, and then it rebooted, and we're at this base spot. Maybe I'll need to select the second boot option, the one with the macOS system. The same thing, so if I select the first option in the bootloader, which I did by accident again, it sits a while and then it reboots. So probably the second is the one to select. Let's try to select the second option here. So macOS base system, enter. ACPI errors and exceptions. It just refuses to boot. So I want to try with previous versions of the operating system. We went with Sonoma 14 and I'm going to go with Ventura 13, and if not, I'm going to go with even older versions. Let's just close QEMU. Let's see what files have been created in here. Base system, chunk lists, DMG, IMG. Maybe it's a good idea to just start everything from scratch instead of deleting the files that have been created after I git cloned. So the DMG files, the IMG file, the QCow file, etc. I'm going to just delete the current directory. Okay, and start the procedure from 0. This. This is not needed. I have already run it once. And fetching the installer from the macOS servers. This time I'm going to select Ventura 13, so 6. Then this step to generate an IMG file, and then this step to create a QCow file, and then I'm going to boot, select the second option in the boot screen. The files have downloaded correctly. The DMG file, convert to IMG, create QEMU virtual hard disk image, boot, macOS base system, I try 2 times, all sorts of errors each time. I have deleted the directory. In here, then I have run the git clone again. I'm fetching the image. This time I have selected macOS Monterey 12.6, so version, so I have provided 5 as input. Generate the QEMU file, virtual hard disk. Boot. Second option. Another error. I tried the exact same thing with macOS Big Sur, and it's the first time that the boot doesn't just crash. We are at this splash screen, which is almost graphical mode. This is a macOS application. In here we should do what it says in the readme of OSX-KVM, which is use the disk utility tool within macOS installer. Let's see how we do that. So disk utility, double click. Partition, format the virtual disk, a8bf. So let's see what that place is. We have a S88 disk. This is the image that has been downloaded from the internet, the boot image, the boot disk. And this is the virtual hard disk, QEMU hard disk. It's 275 gigabytes in size. It was created with 256 gigabytes size. And part of it is in this partition. Which is 400 megabytes. So I guess this is what we want to select. QEMU hard disk media 275 gigabytes. Okay, create image. Do we do that? So I have selected the correct space. Either use the toolbar button erase or from the main menu, edit and then erase. It suggests a globally unique partition table, a GPT, which is correct. Suggests file system a8bf, which is correct. And then we could use a name for this volume, something different than untitled. Press the erase button. Creating the partition map. Journaled file system a8bf container. Okay, from this button, view I have selected show all devices. By default, it's show only volumes. Okay, so again, this is the macOS base systems. This is the boot device. This is what we have just formatted. Almost entirely free partition, container disk 22. At this point, formatting is done. We should exit the disk utility graphical user interface application. Like this, for instance, from the main menu, disk utility, and then quit disk utility. And now it's time to install macOS Big Sur. I have selected reinstall macOS Big Sur. Continue. EULA. I agree. I agree again. I don't want to install to the boot device, which is a, I don't know, USB stick, macOS based system. I want to install to the virtual hard disk, which is 274 gigabytes. This guy. Untitled. Continue. And in the main menu of the application that we're currently inside, so the graphical user interface application install macOS Big Sur, in the main menu there's this option installer log. The progress might take hours, as it says in here, 2 hours estimated duration. And the installer log does show something, some progress while waiting this much of a time period. In my experience, this part fails half of the time. We might be able to finish installing macOS Big Sur correctly in the first try, or we might need to do this part multiple times, where some files are not being downloaded correctly from the internet, or there's other issues during OS installer setup. Even more, in this checkbox detail level, you can select to not show just errors, but to show everything, which then tells us that 3 minutes ago, this line, a huge file started to be downloaded, 14 gigabytes, install assistant.macOS Big Sur from the content delivery network. Downloading this file might take a while or even fail. So it took more than 10 minutes to probably download install assistant.macOS Big Sur. We'll see if we get more progress or it already failed to download this package and it will not go any further. I can see that it's waiting to download this package, 12 gigabytes, but then there's zero network traffic. And that's probably because if we're going to look at the file that we're running, so this one, opencoreboot.sh, it's a long QEMU command line with various parameters. And the network interface card that's provided for the QEMU virtual machine needs to be supported out of the box by macOS Big Sur. For that we have instructions on post installation says networking nodes. In here it says that there should be a line in that configuration file. Let's run it. Let's open the file, open core boot sh. And that says that the script should work with Big Sur. We have two possibilities for CPUs, and we must change Haswell Panarin, which is the CPU, to Haswell No TSX for Sonoma, which we did not do when we tried Sonoma. And then as network interface card, it tries to use VirtIONet PCI, which I'm not sure is supported by macOS Big Sur. And in here it says that the better supported network interface card hardware is Intel 1000 with this variety. So it says that the netdev line should be netdev user ID net 0. This is forwarding the SSH 22 TCP port. Then device, then network adapter type, which let's put this one in there and make a copy of the file first. So copy, open boot, open core minus boot. So let's replace VirtIONet PCI with the Intel 1000. And then netdev net 0, ID net 0, a MAC address. This should just work. Doesn't require any setup in the host operating system. But it's slow. Should just work. Okay, let's save the file and try everything from scratch. Not really. Let's see how we can shut down this thing. Close the installer log, cancel, quit, and shut down somehow. Okay, run open core boot again. Select macOS base system, the second option in the boot menu. This time the virtual hard disk is partitioned correctly. And we should be able to just start the installer process. The graphical user interface application recovery assistant. I needed to reboot the QEMU. And now let's try reinstalling macOS Big Sur. Continue. And let's see if downloading and networking works correctly this time. No network traffic yet. I'm not sure how to test if the networking works at all. For instance, how to ping. Do we have a terminal available in here during the installation phase? I couldn't prove that this KD system monitor shows networking activity correctly. So I'm using the old style text user interface application iptraf that's showing a ton of incoming bytes, a large speed TCP packets. So I'm waiting, hopefully that's the 12 gigabytes package that's being downloaded.